Everyone for joining this webinar on successful grant writing. As I said, my name is Emily and I'm the Adolescent and Youth Engagement Manager for FP 2020. So we are excited to host this webinar for so many reasons. The first is that in my position, I'm able to talk to young people all around the world. I see on the line so far today, we have young people from Canada and India and Cameroon and Nigeria and Sierra Leone and many other places, which is such a beautiful and wonderful thing that we're all here today. The reason that FP 2020 is hosting a two-part series, this is the first of two, on both grant writing and grant management. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because every time I talk to young people working in sexual and reproductive health or on other issues that are important to young people, I realize that the number one issue they have is that they say, we're working really hard all the time, day and night, but we're working for free. We're doing a lot of volunteer work along with our studies and other jobs, and you all are really overworking yourselves. And so we want to help you to make sure that when you apply for grants, to make sure that you don't always have to do things as a volunteer, that you have the best chance of being able to get a grant. Grant writing is like any other skill. You have to practice, you have to learn the best ways of doing it in order to get it right. So even if you're not sure if you're a great grant writer now, it doesn't mean that you can't become a great grant writer. So that's our hope for today, is that you'll learn some new things that will help you to build your skills related to grant writing so that you can continue to do the good work that you're doing and be able to afford to pay yourselves and to pay some of your volunteers to do the good work that you're doing. So with that, I am going to hand this briefly over to my colleague Courtney, who's going to explain to you how Zoom works. Some of you may be familiar, some of you won't be. So Courtney, could you explain to everyone how to use Zoom quickly before we pass it on to our two speakers, Jonathan and Mariah, for today?
Absolutely. Thank you everyone again, and Emily for the introduction. Before we get started with today's webinar, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to share some logistical notes with everyone. First, you should see in front of you the presentation, and at the bottom of the presentation, you'll see a navigation bar with two pods featured. One where you can submit questions, the Q&A pod, and one some of you have already sent chats to the attendees and the meeting hosts introducing yourselves and where you're calling from. Again, please use the Q&A pod for questions that you would like to have answered at the end of the presentation. And for any issues, audio or technical difficulties, you can use the chat pod. If you're unable to reach us or you need to use email, you can email info@familyplanning2020.org, and I'll share that in the chat pod so that you see it. The webinar is being recorded today. Thank you again for joining us and for your participation. Now I'm going to hand it off to Jonathan and Mariah.
Sorry, 1 second.
Good morning. This is Mariah, and we'd like to start with quick fires of ourselves. Here are 3 things you need to know about Jonathan. Number 1, he's a ghostwriter whose work has appeared in publications such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Number 2, he's delivered workshops and webinars before clients, including Twitter, Visa, and the United States Department of Agriculture. Number 3, he also teaches business writing at the University of Maryland at College Park, which is where we met. I was a student in his course last semester.
Good morning. This is Jonathan. Here are 3 things you need to know about Mariah. Number 1, she recently graduated from the University of Maryland at College Park with a bachelor's degree in psychology. Number 2, she specializes in the practitioner side of psychology, and she's passionate about understanding group dynamics in business. Number 3, whether it's taking on a home improvement project or making personalized gifts for friends and family, she loves to discover new do-it-yourself ideas on Pinterest.
Okay, so I'd like to just give you all an overview of what we'll be talking about today. Grant writing is serious business. For some nonprofits, a single grant can mean the difference between hiring someone versus laying her off. It's often a significant source of revenue for even big nonprofits, and that's to say nothing of the fierce competition. The demand for money far outpaces the supply for it. Yet here's the thing. Grants, whether for nonprofits, academics, scientists, or even states via the federal government, are like resumes. About a quarter of them can be rejected with prejudice at first blush, without any consideration. Why? Well, that's for the same reason resumes get tossed in the trash. Because the applicant is not qualified, because her proposal is too vague, because she ignored instructions. So that's the bad news. But here's the good news. Grants are gameable. That is, there are a variety of proven ways you can almost guarantee you'll make it to the final round. Specifically, if you internalize and incorporate the following 13 lessons, you'll turbocharge the likelihood you get funded.
One last thing before we begin. In describing their work, grant writers can sometimes be imprecise. For example, they sometimes use the word grant to refer both to the document from the donor and their own response to it. That's confusing. So in the interest of clarity, we'd like to define a few key terms. Donors, usually foundations, issue RFPs, or requests for proposals. Organizations like yours respond to these RFPs by filling out an application. In other words, you write a proposal. A team of reviewers then evaluates your proposal. If your proposal scores highly, you get a grant. Number 1, follow instructions to the letter. About 10 years ago, the CEO of a local nonprofit got a call from a major corporate donor. The donor had good news. Not only had the nonprofit won the grant it applied for, the grant was also much larger than expected. The CEO was so delighted with the unexpected news, she didn't pause to ask how it happened. After she informed her staff, one brave team member spoke up. Why did they give us more money than we asked for? He wondered. The CEO didn't have an answer, but she promised to find out. A few months later, she was at a reception in Washington, D.C., where she ran into a vice president of the donor firm. This was it, an in-person opportunity to pop the long-wondered question. She phrased it carefully. Quote, "We applied for a $30,000 grant. You awarded us $50,000. I'm sure you can appreciate my curiosity. How'd that happen?" End quote. The VP was candid. It wasn't because the nonprofit's proposal was more persuasive than the others, or because the nonprofit had a better record of execution, or really anything like that. The reason was both simple and eye-opening. Her nonprofit had turned in its proposal on time, complete with all the attachments and all the required information. By contrast, many of the other organizations had not. Really, the CEO asked? Really, the VP replied. Our RFPs have extensive requirements for a reason. If you can't follow instructions now, how can we trust that you'll do so later, after we've given you our money? Can you share an example? The CEO said, sure. We asked for 4 references. Some proposals provided 3. One even provided 6. Once we saw these basic errors, we stopped reading, end quote. Now, listen, is this harsh? Certainly. Then again, they're giving you a lot of money, so they're entitled to hold you to high standards. This point is so important, I want to share another example. In 2017, Wittenberg University applied for a grant to tutor low-income high school students. The RFP required that everything be double-spaced. Yet buried within the university's 65-page proposal, one small section was single-spaced. The other 64 pages were double-spaced, but it didn't matter. The proposal was thrown out and no money was awarded. According to the Chronicle of Higher Education, this kind of minor technical glitch is more common than you'd think. At least 40 colleges have likewise had their proposals summarily rejected by the U.S. Department of Education, all for not double spacing or using the wrong font. The takeaway? Follow instructions to the letter. They may be arbitrary, but you run afoul of them at your own risk.
Okay, number 2, know your donor. The biggest mistake we see with grants is an assumption. Don't assume that just because a foundation gives to groups similar to yours, that they'll give to you. Nothing in life is free. You have to earn every dollar. That said, remember, grants are gameable. And so once you decide you're applying for a grant, the first thing you want to do is to know your donor. Think of a proposal like a job interview. You wouldn't walk into the office of a potential employer without having done some research about who they are and what they're looking for. The same truth applies to grants. So learn as much as you possibly can. With Google as your best friend, research is pretty easy these days. And so here are a few specific things to look for. Number 1, the mission. What is its explicitly stated purpose for giving grants? Is it social justice? Is it economic freedom? As Jonathan discussed earlier, make sure to reference this phrase throughout your proposal. Number 2, grant history. 2 things here. You need to look for who's received their grants in the past and what kind of projects are they supporting currently. In other words, research not only who they funded, but also what they're funding. Number 3, people. Here, your best friend is LinkedIn. So you can check LinkedIn to see if you have any mutual contacts. Look not only at the foundation's executives on LinkedIn, but also you can search for its board members. If links exist, make sure to capitalize on them. Number 4, social media. Another important research outlet is social media. Check the foundation's Twitter and Facebook pages to see what issues they are most interested in. And if you really want to dig deep, study which accounts they retweeted, which they follow, and which tweets they like. This information hiding in plain sight is an underappreciated source of knowledge. And number 5, current events. You can do a Google News search for the foundation. Are they often quoted in the press? Do they issue new news releases? What's their current focus? These are all things that you can look for just by doing a Google search. And so in short, when it comes to proposals, there's no such thing as too much research. The other thing is, this. Think about your proposal as a selling process. Just on a side note, I want to tell you guys just a personal story. When I transferred to college, I wanted to make some money on the side, so I got into direct sales and I became a makeup consultant for a company called Unique. And I really had no luck with it at all, but I later realized throughout my college experience that I wasn't selling the product. I was just doing tutorials, applying the product, but I wasn't selling the product. I wasn't telling women that were interested, why my product was better than competitors. And that's ultimately the main reason why the direct sales did not work out for me 4 years ago. So back to grant writing, what does this mean for you? Well, donors are buyers. They have an agenda and they're entitled to it. The bottom line is this: understand what motivates your donor, then tailor your proposal to those ends.
Hi there. Number 3, repeat back their own language up front. The first rule of grant writing is similar to what a marriage therapist or negotiator would tell you. Make sure you understand, truly, deeply understand the other person's point of view. After all, to persuade someone, you need to grasp exactly what they want, not generally what they want, exactly. When it comes to grant writing, precision is your friend. What's the easiest way to persuade a donor? Repeat their own language back to them up front. Here's my go-to example. I'm a ghostwriter. That is, I help people put their vision into words by way of op-eds, PowerPoint presentations, and speeches. Yet some clients don't want a ghostwriter, they want a speechwriter. What's the difference? Any guesses? Anybody? Any ideas? There's no difference. They're the same thing. It's just semantics. But here's the thing. If I want to get hired by these folks, I can't call myself a ghostwriter. I call myself a speechwriter. You should do the same thing when writing your proposal. Repeating back a donor's language has 2 benefits. First, you're telling the donor you understand exactly what they're looking for. Second, you're flattering them by using their own words. Here's another opportunity to use this mirroring strategy. Most proposals you write have a section for the bios of your team and a description of your organization. It's tempting to copy and paste this info from your website or a previous proposal. Resist that temptation with all your might. Anything that smells of cut and paste is a wasted opportunity. Instead, make sure you customize or tailor your boilerplate to the project at hand. One last example. This one is the hardest, but also the most important. The people reading your proposal typically score it based on what's called a rubric. One of the criteria they often use is innovation. That is, how innovative are your ideas? Now, if asked, most proposal writers would say, of course our proposal is innovative. Just look at the ideas we articulate in section 6, subsection B, and paragraphs 7 through 14 on page 33. You know what? That may be perfectly true, but it's not at all obvious. That's because your innovative ideas are scattered throughout your proposal, which means your reviewer has to flip back and forth. As a result, there's a good chance she'll skip something, she won't remember something, or she won't recognize something. These are not chances you want to risk. What can you do instead? Consult the criteria by which proposals are judged. Then use these specific words as subheadings in your own proposal. Let me repeat that. If innovation is one of the criteria by which you'll be judged, Then create a section under the subheading, you guessed it, innovation. Think of your reviewer this way. She's on a train. The ride is bumpy. She's pressed for time, and her chair is uncomfortable. She's reading a lot of proposals, all of which are long, many of which are similar. Don't force her to use a microscope. In fact, don't give her any reason to give your grant application the short shrift. Make things as easy as possible for her to fill out her rubric. Recycle her own language.
Number 4, make up for your inexperience with the PAT technique. So here's a fact. It's very common for youth-led organizations to be denied funding because they lack experience, both in years and in financial history. Sadly, you can't snap your fingers and automatically generate a record that's comparable to that of an older organization. But what you can do is leverage the power of your small wins. Let me repeat that. You can leverage the power of your small wins. So I'm fairly positive that each woman on this webinar today has accomplished something in her lifetime. And what you lack in years can be supplemented by emphasizing what we call the PAT technique. PAT stands for 3 things. First, it stands for your passion. Second, your ambition. And third, your thoughtfulness and technique. One tip, don't hide from your lack of experience, especially if you're competing against folks who've been in the business for decades. Instead, acknowledge your newness explicitly. And the bottom line here is that you must avail yourself of every advantage you can. So what you lack in age, you can make up for in creativity. You can show how your passion, your ambition, your thoughtfulness, your specific technique has specifically brought you you have had significant accomplishments because of those things, and that is what drives you. Number 5, write a headline. So let me let you in on a little secret. Headlines are the single best way to hook your reader. It is your opportunity to make your proposal stand out immediately. A couple of examples. Here's what most proposals do. FP 2020's application for a contraception grant. Why is this bad? Well, it's very, very vague, and that's most likely the title of the request for proposal. And it shows nothing about what you plan to do, what your goals are. There's nothing specific that's in that title. Here's what smart proposals do. All women deserve access to life-saving contraception. Here's our plan. This one, it uses emotional words to emphasize your goal. It immediately catches your eye. When you look at that, you see the word deserve, and that is completely different from just saying FP 2020's application for a grant. Here's another bad example. Proposal for the Ford Foundation. Same situation here, just very vague, boring. It doesn't show anything that would make your specific proposal stand out because everybody else is also writing a proposal for the Ford Foundation. But what about this one? We want to help 120 million women use contraceptives. This one, it stands out because it's specific, it uses numbers, and it clearly states what you want to do. We want to help, and that is what is going to make your proposal stand out. The bottom line, A catchy headline is one of the easiest ways to make your proposal go to the next round.
Excellent. Thank you, Mariah. Number 6, use the VVH technique to craft your statement of need. As you can tell, we like acronyms and abbreviations. We have PAT, now we have VVH. Your statement of need is one of the most important parts of your proposal. Yet many writers make a rookie mistake here. They explain what they want before they establish why it's necessary. In other words, they describe how they'll accomplish the project without convincing the reviewer why the project matters. Equally disappointing, they never explain why the project cannot succeed without the donor's help. But an ideal statement of need should not be about you. It should be about your donor and why you need them. Here's a trick we use to craft statements of need. We pretend we're dramatists and thus identify the 3 key elements in any work of literature. Number 1, a villain. Number 2, a victim. Number 3, any guesses? We got a villain, we got a victim, begins with H. A hero. What does this principle look like in practice? Here's a quick example. Technical writing. We're seeking your help to grow our internship program from 50 to 200 students. This funding will enable us to expand the number of activists fighting to protect public education. Okay, that's good. It's technically proficient, but it's not terribly compelling. It's certainly not unique. By contrast, here's what the dramatist would do. Public funding of private schools threatens the quality of education in America. To thwart this trend, higher learning teaches college students about the importance of public education and trains them in ways to protect this national treasure. We need your help to grow our internship program from 50 to 200 interns, without which vouchers and charters will continue to drain money from the goal of better schools for everyone, not just a select few. Now, why is the dramatic version more likely to inspire your reader? Because it identifies a villain, that's private schools, a victim, public schools, and a hero, the internship program, and of course the donor who enables its expansion. So, the next time you write a statement of need, don't just recite the facts. Issue a call to arms. Send forth a rallying cry. Create drama. Number 7, get detailed. Let me put this point simply. Details win. Generalities fail. One of the most common complaints we hear from reviewers is this. They say the proposal has a lot of great ideas, but details are scarce. So what's the solution? Always, always, always support your plan with specifics. It's better to demonstrate that you've thought deeply about the project at hand in all its complexity, rather than risking a comment like, quote, I'd love to support this proposal, but I'm worried it's too vague, end quote. To avoid this trap, here are 2 tried and true tactics. Number 1, the more numbers, the better. Consider the following excerpt from a proposal. In fiscal year 2018, we achieved the following quantifiable successes. Responded to 33 parliamentary requests for input and testimony. Developed relationships with 1,000 media contacts, including reporters at the BBC, The Guardian, and the National Broadcasting Network. Secured $250,000 in donations from 1,700 Supporters? Help 24 states pass legislation that relaxes occupational licensing laws. What does each bullet have in common? A number. Number 2, let's say you're applying for a grant that's supposed to last for a year. Most RFPs want you to provide some kind of timeline that shows your progress over this period. This, a timeline, is an opportunity to distinguish yourself. Too many proposal writers simply tick off the tasks they aim to accomplish. By contrast, the smart writer goes into depth. She specifies deadlines and commits to accomplishing things by dates laid out in advance. The best writers go even further. They present a visual version of their timeline. This usually takes the form of a diagram or a table. These visual aids offer critical benefits. Not only do they make your proposal easier and more enjoyable to read, they also help you, if you win the grant, to get started. After all, you now have a schedule. Number 8, give your budget a narrative. Let me ask you a simple question. Do you want your proposal to stand out from those of your competitors? Seriously, do you want your proposal to stand out? Of course you do. Well, let me tell you a secret that will wow your reviewers. All too often, proposal writers pour their blood, sweat, and tears into the narrative, then give the budget section all the warmth of a spreadsheet. Big mistake. Many donors say that the budget is often the first thing they look at. In other words, this is the one chance you get to make a first impression. Do you use this chance to show you're serious and thoughtful? Or do you let this precious opportunity go to waste? Here's an example. The majority of proposals include money for expenses, like airfare and taxis. More often than not, proposals offer up a generalized estimate for these costs, say $15,000 for travel. Now look, estimating is easy when you're playing with other people's money. The smart writer, however, the one who wins grants again and again, gets super specific. She not only breaks down the cost of each item, $20 for an average taxi ride in Salt Lake City, she also specifies that her team will, when possible, use Lyft's cheaper carpooling option. Likewise, she notes that her team will only fly coach and that everyone will use Expedia to price shop for flights, even if that means long layovers or leaving on a weekend. Here's some sample language we made up. Because parking at the Nairobi Shelter for Reintegration is severely limited, our 2 researchers will need daily transportation. As of July 2019, the cost of a round-trip rush hour bus ticket from our office in New Delhi is $9.50. While no discounts are available, even with bulk purchases or for nonprofits, these costs could be reduced if people choose to walk or bike. The bottom line, even if your RFP doesn't call for a budgetary narrative, you should absolutely provide one. Describe and justify your estimates. Tell your reviewer that you'll treat her money as if it were your own. After reading your budget, your donor should feel confident that your organization would be a responsible steward of their generosity.
Okay, number 9, avoid jargon. So last semester in college, I did an internship at Kennedy Krieger Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that treats children with behavioral disorders. And while I was there, one of my tasks was to edit a grant. And when I was editing the grant, it was so loaded up with jargon that I had no idea what it was talking about or what I was working with. And I raised these concerns to my supervisor at the time, who told me in no uncertain terms to keep the jargon intact. The people evaluating the grant will understand the jargon, she told me. Everybody in the industry speaks that way. Well, maybe that's true, but here's the bigger picture. We had to submit 20 copies of our proposal, which meant that we had 20 readers, which means we had to trust that all 20 people were as familiar with terms like CBT and BIP and GAD as we trained psychologists were. CBT in psychological terms is cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, somebody who is not familiar with the field of psychology probably wouldn't know that, but it's just another way of saying talk therapy. So that makes, by saying talk therapy in the proposal, that makes it easier for people who aren't as familiar with the field to understand what you're writing. Remember, grants are made by individuals, not faceless institutions. And here are 3 reasons why using plain language in your proposal will put you at a disadvantage, or you at an advantage. Number 1, you won't lose any readers who aren't as knowledgeable as you are. Number 2, you'll demonstrate the ability to communicate with different audiences. This is super important because in today's age, it's imperative that you can adapt your message to different media. And number 3, you'll impress donors with your ability to explain and break down complex issues. So instead of using fancy words, try to strive for a more conversational tone. Number 10, set internal deadlines. So let's say your proposal isn't due until Friday. Most people in this scenario will give their colleagues a deadline of Friday, but smart program managers don't do this. They give their colleagues a deadline of Thursday or even Wednesday. As anyone who lives in a deadline-driven environment can tell you, things almost always get in the way. Life happens, people get sick, people procrastinate. So what's the solution? To give you and your team a buffer. Similarly, resist the temptation to deliver your proposal at the last minute. What does that say about you? I distinctly remember when I was in college, I really had issues with deadlines. Because I work better and I perform better under pressure. And not setting an internal deadline and just relying on the actual deadline from my professors cost me my entire 2-month-long research proposal that I was working on in class. Now, I finished this proposal probably a week in advance, I would say. And when I finally went to submit it, of course, at the last minute, I realized that I did not have Microsoft Office on my computer. And so I had to go through the process of downloading it. And ultimately, I ended up submitting my project that I finished early late because I did not set an internal deadline for myself. So finally, don't assume that just because you delivered the proposal that it was received. If you sent the proposal via snail mail, follow up via email. If you sent the proposal via email, follow up via phone call. As a bonus, this quick follow-up establishes your reputation as someone who's thorough and careful. Number 11, tap a dedicated editor. Time and time again, we hear donors say they get lost when reading proposals. That's because, to be honest, the writing is just bad. The ideas are good, but they're expressed poorly. Your proposal should not read like a series of memos, each of which was written with a different person. Your proposal should read like a coherent narrative with a unifying tone and a uniform editorial style. Indeed, the way you write your proposal will tell your donor a lot about you. So for example, do you use the serial comma consistently? Or are you inconsistent? Do you use 2 spaces between sentences or only 1? These things may sound like they're just minor details, but such sloppiness reveals a lack of editorial integrity. So what's the solution? Well, while many people will contribute to your proposal, you should tap a single person to be the editor. An editor not only checks for typos, she also brings everything together in a cohesive fashion. For example, you don't want to repeat the same points, but you do want to repeat the same key phrases. A dedicated editor helps ensure that your good work is packaged the way it deserves to be.
Excellent. Okay, guys, we're rounding the corner. We're almost done. Sorry for the sports metaphor. We are coming up on the end. Number 12, make it pretty. Years ago, I worked for Booz Allen Hamilton, one of the big management consultancies in the United States. Before I got to Booz, I assumed that the firm won a lot of work with the US federal government because it hired a lot of high-ranking officials who previously worked there and retained a robust Rolodex. Yet after I got hired, I realized I was mistaken. Booz won work because its proposals were brilliant. For today, I'd like to focus on one aspect of the proposals that was particularly striking, their design. Leave aside the words and the ideas for a minute. The way the firm's proposals were formatted made an immediate impression that Booz Allen was professional and polished. That's because these documents didn't consist, as most do, of long blocks of text. Instead, Booz's proposals consisted of short paragraphs, together with pictures and charts and even colors. In short, they were beautifully designed and aesthetically pleasing. As I tell my students, how a document looks can be as important as what a document says. Let me repeat that. How a document looks can be as important as what a document says.
My guess is that many of you have been trying to write grants for a long time. And some of you have been successful, and other times you've had more difficulties. So far, we have 3 questions. The first question that I'll go ahead and answer or put forward is, can you describe a little bit more about what a narrative budget is?
Sure, this is Jonathan. A narrative budget is a supplement that you add to your budget section. Most budget sections simply consist of a table. And they say, listen, we want to spend $10,000 on this, $5,000 on that, $3,500 on this. That's what most proposals do. The problem is the budget section is the first thing people look at, and so you want yours to stand out. The best way to do that is to write a narrative for each cost. That is to say, you explain why you need $10,000 for X and $5,000 for Y. And in explaining, you justify your costs in detail. You say, listen, we've done some research, and the average cost of a bike ride or a scooter ride or a bus ride is $13.16. That's a narrative. It doesn't necessarily need to be a narrative in the sense of a story. It needs to be an expository narrative, something that you explain. People just don't want to be told that this is going to cost. Think about yourself. You don't want to be told that a carpentry project in your house is going to cost $100. You want to be told that it's going to cost $25 for labor and $75 for parts. In other words, the more detail and description you can provide about your budget, the more successful you will be.
Great. That's an excellent question. What is the next question is about the editing process and the red team of people who you trust to review your proposal. Do you advise having one overall editor after everyone has gone through and done the red team? Can you describe the process that you think is the best for doing final editing and reviewing?
This is Mariah. It is good to have one overall editor. However, throughout the process, it's also good to have, say, college professors or peers and family advisors in school to also look at it. Just going back on the topic of jargon, the overall editor probably would be familiar with certain terms, but then you need other people who aren't as familiar with it so that you can make sure you have a very well-rounded, easily comprehensible grant proposal. So somebody like your parents or your friends, they would be good to reach out to just throughout the process. But it is important to have one specific person overall.
Great, thank you for that. So the advice there is to make sure you have a diverse team of people who are reviewing, and then likely one person whose mandate is to really do a final review and make sure everything, as Jonathan pointed out, looks pretty and is flowing well throughout the document. So another question we have received is related to, let's see, what is the best way to track when different organizations send out requests for proposals? What's the best way to find out that they've been released?
Good question. This is Jonathan. Excellent question. I'm tempted to answer this briefly and then say stay tuned for part 2, where we'll talk about this question and others similar to it. The question is, where do you learn about proposals? How do you track them? There are dozens of places, including, I believe, grants.gov, where you can browse till your heart's content, almost, in from an endless reservoir, similar to YouTube, of all the grants that are issued by the U.S. federal government. And we'll talk about that more later in a few weeks. But how do you track them? My recommendation would be to create a shared document, whether an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet, something that your team has access to, and make sure that you invest everyone on the team in the success of the spreadsheet. That is, at your regular meetings, you should let people know, whoever is the program manager of the grant program. Just want everyone to be aware that we have an upcoming grant due in 2 weeks. Then, in 2 months, we have another one. Our biggest one is due at the end of September. How do you track that? Technically, it's an easy question. You just have to figure out what program works best for you. I would say the larger, harder, and more important part is to get buy-in and enthusiasm from everyone on your staff. Winning a proposal is a deeply collaborative effort. It shouldn't be siloed or clustered off to a group, a small coterie of specialists. Everyone on the team, everyone in your organization has unique knowledge that they can bring to bear. I hope that was appropriately vague, enough so as to whet your appetite for our part 2. Hello?
Oh, sorry, I realized I was unmuted. I apologize. Thank you, Jonathan, for that explanation of the of how to follow requests for proposals. I would also, as Mariah and Jonathan suggested earlier, to keep track of different donors' social media pages, get on their listservs, newsletters is another way to follow or to receive the news that a request for proposal has been issued. Two more quick questions, maybe three. We'll see what we have time for. We've been asked, once you submit your proposal, if the request for proposal or if the donor says, please don't follow up, we will contact you. What is the best way to ensure that your grant has actually been received? I'm guessing that people can be a bit nervous that they perhaps didn't receive it, and they just want to make sure they've received it, but they also have the request of not following up.
Excellent question. I really appreciate it. So this is Jonathan. What don't follow up means is, don't in 3 days or 1 week say, hey, just want to see if, there's any good news, if we should be popping champagne, getting ready to pop champagne, or getting ready to hire the new staffer. I don't think that they would have a problem if you sent in the proposal at, let's say, 10 a.m. If you, and let's say you submitted it by email, if you called at 10:15 and said something like this, and the first thing you say should be this: I know the proposal, I know the RFP said no follow-ups. I hope you don't mind. I just want to make sure that our proposal was received. We emailed it to you 15 minutes ago. If in the unlikely event you didn't get it, please do let me know and I'll get it right back to you. I apologize for following up. We're so excited about the potential of working together. We would hate for all our hard work to not be received because of, a glitch on the internet. So I think that's appropriate to do, if you do it quickly right after you send or submit your proposal. What I know they're telling you not to do is what interviewers or jobs will say. We got your resume, don't follow up with us. We'll get back to you if we want to. And listen, you guys know better than anyone, everyone on this call knows better than anyone, the grants you're competing for are competitive. And the donors who are getting your proposals are getting far more document that they could possibly review in great detail. So they have limited time and they don't want to split their time between, and let me rephrase, the more time they spend responding to your incoming follow-ups, the less time they have to thoroughly review your writing. So don't follow up. Yes, it's a horrible situation to be in where you've spent 2 weeks writing this proposal, you send it in and you hear absolutely nothing. I empathize with you. That's frustrating. But they put it there for a reason. They said, don't follow up with us. And I would add this: let's say you write an awesome proposal and yours is the top one so far, but then you follow up in 3 days. You don't get a response and you follow up again. You just undermine your chances. So it's tough, but you gotta be disciplined.
That's great, Jonathan. So there's an appropriate way to do it. Like you said, acknowledge the fact that it's in the actual proposal, the request for proposal, that you're not supposed to follow up, but you're just clarifying that one piece of information. I think that's a great tip. The last question before I clarify something related to FP 2020's grant mechanism is what people are asking about is again related to the budget. You made the very good point that most donors read the budget first, and that means the budget matters the most. The narrative, of course, has to complement the budget, but I think a lot of people are worried about this budget. So the question is, let's say the ceiling or the top, the most amount, the maximum that someone can submit to is for 50,000 US dollars. If that's the case, then would you recommend people always submit up to the very top? Do you exceed the maximum? What amount would you recommend people write into their grant?
That's an excellent question. So most grants will, most RFPs will do one of two things. They'll be open-ended. They'll say, apply for what you think is appropriate, or they'll say we have, $50,000 to award everybody, to award to any number of applicants for the entire year. Rarely do you get something where they say each grant is $10,000. Sometimes that happens, but your question pertains to the first two scenarios. What do? I would be cautious about applying for the full amount. Be very if an organization has, let's say, $50,000 to spend for all of 2019, it doesn't reflect highly on you or them if they put all their eggs in one basket. That is to say, if they give you the full 50K. Instead, I would aim for no more than 50% as a general rule. If an organization has $50,000 to spend for the entire year, it would be unwise of them to spend more than 50% of their entire budget on one organization. If you don't never should you ask for more money than is being offered. That is the quickest way to alienate your donor and to ensure that your proposal ends up in what's colloquially known as the circular file, which is to say the trash bin. In short, this is why a budget narrative is so important. And I think one way to answer the question of how much should you ask for is to write that budget narrative that we discussed. For example, in doing your research, before you do your research, you may think you need, and I'm just making up a number, $5,000 for travel expenses. But in doing your research, you discover a variety of ways to cut costs such that you really only need $3,000. So rather than start with a number that you need or that you think you need, do the research, figure out what things cost, figure out how you can save money, and then show your research and reveal the benefits to your donor. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We are now at the end of our webinar. I know many of you have submitted more questions. We have copied all of them into a separate file. We're going to put them all together and make sure that we address as many of them as possible in a follow-up email and also in the part 2 of this webinar. Part 2 will be on August 8th. We hope that you're also able to attend that webinar, which will be focused on grant management, as well as on what happens after you've gotten that first grant. How do you leverage, meaning how do you use that first grant to try to get yourself a second grant? So now that will be the next follow-up webinar on August 8th. This will be recorded, and we will also do our best to continue to incorporate these tips and recommendations into our work with you all, with young people, and make sure that you sign up for our newsletter on FP 2020's website so that when we send out tips to young people on grant writing and issues related to grants, that you'll be able to receive them. One additional comment that I wanted to make sure was addressed is that FP 2020, Family Planning 2020, is not a donor. However, we do have a small grant mechanism. This grant mechanism is called the Rapid Response Mechanism. RRM. If into Google you type in FP 2020 RRM, all those two different acronyms, then it will easily pop up our web page on the Rapid Response Mechanism grant. This grant is a rolling grant. That means there is no deadline. That means you can apply at any time during the year. The reason that we accept grants all year round is because that grant mechanism is related to time-sensitive issues. So if something is happening in your community right now, or you're planning on something happening in the future, then you can apply for the grant at any time of year, assuming that something time-sensitive is happening. The details of the grant proposal are on our website. As Jonathan and Mariah recommended at the beginning of this webinar, following instructions and doing research on the donor is really important. So do read the details of the Rapid Response Mechanism grant or any other grant before applying. So please do take a look at that website, Rapid Response Mechanism grant. We'll put it into the chat box. My colleague will put the link to that into the chat box. And we'll also include it in the follow-up. Great, I'm so glad you all have joined us. I want to thank Jonathan and Mariah. I trust we're all giving you a round of applause from our various homes around the world. I hope everyone has a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks for joining, everyone.